Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, which was released in November of 1986. This film was directed by Leonard Nimoy. There were four people credited on the screenplay, although Harv Bennett and Nicholas Meyer did the rewrite, and I think much of what we see on the screen is what they brought to the final screenplay. Famously, Nicholas Meyer, who directed Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, of course, came back, and he wrote the scenes set in the 1980s, and Harv Bennett wrote the scenes set in space, in the present 23rd century of Star Trek. So the film worked nicely that way. Of course, Meyer had also written and directed Time After Time in 1979, another time travel movie that's set in San Francisco. So revisiting some familiar territory there. This film was a big hit when it came out in November of '86. The Star Trek franchise, the movies, are really starting to hit a stride at this point. I mean, starting with Wrath of Khan, and then The Search for Spock, and then Voyage Home, you kind of have a trilogy in the middle of the original run of movies, and we have recurring themes that are brought to, I think, a satisfying conclusion with the Voyage Home. The themes of redemption mostly, and resurrection, and ethical decisions about how to that phrase they talk about, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and that's kind of an ongoing theme throughout 2, 3, and 4. So I like how Voyage Home ties all these together like I said, in a really satisfying way. I remember seeing this in the theater in '86. I would have been 6, 7 years old around the time, but I do remember seeing it. I remember it was a packed theater. I remember a lot of laughter. And I remember I enjoyed it as well, and the humor I really latched on to, because I had seen Star Trek on TV, of course, the original show from the '60s, and to see these characters, being funny, I just remember that was just such a lot of fun to watch, and seeing these characters curse and make jokes and things like that. I just remember it was a lot of fun to watch this movie, and I think it connected with audiences. That was always one of the dilemmas of Star Trek movies. Clearly, the fans of the franchise will always come out, but how do you get more people to come? And maybe 4 did the best job of that. 2, you could say Wrath of Khan as well, was quite successful. All 2, 3, and 4, they all were good at that, but Voyage Home maybe did it the best. And I think we get to the next film. The Final Frontier tried to do that again, and maybe with mixed results, but I'll have more to say about that film in another video. But Voyage Home, yeah, just a really crowd-pleasing, satisfying movie. I mean, it starts out with, it's still there, the tribute to the Challenger, the crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger that perished earlier that year in January of 1986. So there's a moving tribute to start out the film. And as the story gets going, we still have business, of course, in the previous film, Search for Spock, to tie up. Of course, Spock has been resurrected, and we start out on Vulcan, and Spock is kind of finding who he is again, after his incredible experience, I guess, of returning from death. He and McCoy have a brief discussion about it in a good scene, and McCoy asks Spock, "What was it like? What was it?" And Spock says, "Well, you have no point of reference, Doctor," or something like that. So there's no way I could possibly explain it to you. So, yeah, that's just one of the really, really well written scenes throughout Star Trek 4. But anyway, they're back on Vulcan, and they realize they have to go back to Earth to face trial because of what they did in the previous film. They stole a starship, blew up a starship, and disobeyed orders. And they're going to be in big trouble when they get back to Earth. But they all agree to go back. So and they're in the Bird of Prey, of course, the Klingon ship, and on the way back to Earth, they learn about this probe that has arrived on Earth, and that it's disrupting the oceans and disrupting the climate of the planet, putting the planet in great peril. And after some investigating, they realize the probe is trying to communicate with humpback whales. And since in the 23rd century, humpback whales have gone extinct, so Kirk decides they're going to have to try time travel, go back to the 1980s, and get some whales, bring them back to the future. So, time travel has always been a great trope in Star Trek. I mean, the TV series would often use time travel. City on the Edge of Forever is maybe the most popular episode of the series, in which Kirk and Spock and McCoy go back to the 1930s. But there would be other uses of time travel, and interesting enough, in some of the extras in the interviews, William Shatner said that he didn't like time travel stories. So, and I'll have more to say about that later. But nevertheless, it was a really probably wise move, I think, for them to go back to the contemporary world of the 1980s and put the crew there. That's an easy thing to kind of copy over and over. I know, like the Picard TV show tried to do that, but in '86 this was such a kind of a novel concept, so I think it really worked out well. And Back to the Future had just come out the year before, so I think there was a real audience liked time travel stories, and they were becoming more popular. So they go back to Earth. They do a slingshot around the sun, and yeah, I actually did some Google researching, like what is the physics of that? Like what were they trying to do? And is Starfleet, if they can time travel anytime they want, why don't they do it all the time? But apparently it's heavily regulated and this and that. So it's a very rare thing to do. And Kirk does it to save the planet, save the Earth. So I guess that would justify the risks that come with time travel. And then they go back to Earth, and there's just a lot of really comedic scenes on Earth, with Spock not understanding profanity and the language, and there's just a lot of great puns and verbal humor when they're back on Earth. And everyone has something to do. Scotty, McCoy, and Sulu have to secure some technology so they can carry the whales back with them, and Chekhov and Uhura kind of go off on their own little adventure, and they have to attain some materials as well. So everyone's given something to do, and it works out fine. And it's just really funny. I mean, there's a famous scene in the bus where the punk rock guy has got his boombox going, and Spock does a nerve pinch. So that's a classic scene, of course. And so just things like that really worked in the story, and it really ties a lot of the threads together. I think in particular the theme of redemption in Star Trek 4, which has been going throughout the 2, 3, and 4, the idea of Kirk and his crew redeeming themselves after they disobeyed orders to go save Spock, and but also about human activity on Earth, which led to the extinction of whales in the 23rd century, and to right that wrong, right? So there is a environmental message in the film, nicely weaved into it, and I think Leonard Nimoy in interviews was quite pleased in a popular movie, and that message could be put out. It's not a message movie by any means. It's an adventure movie, but if you can do that, that works as well. I think Nimoy, I just wrote down a quote. He said in this film he wanted there to be no dying, no fighting, no photon torpedoes, no shooting, no phaser blasts, no stereotypical villains. I wanted people to have a really great time watching this film, and even introduce some big ideas, which would be even better. So once again, I think the film was very successful in doing that. So yeah, and of course they're successful in their mission, and they go back to the 23rd century, and the crew is acquitted of all charges except one. Kirk gets demoted back to captain, which of course is what he's kind of wanted all along through the Star Trek movies. And we end where a new Enterprise has been christened. So it really, that rebirth theme, which we kind of got in 2, 3, and 4, but we get that definitely here at the end of 4 as well. Yeah, so just a total crowd pleaser. I like the music in this one. Leonard Rossaman did the music, and I like the main score for Voyage Home. I think it has a very majestic theme, which I like. But I like all the scores in all the Star Trek movies. Everyone did a good job, but I like 4. Maybe it's just some nostalgia because I remember seeing it quite young, and it did kind of stick with me a little bit. But yeah, yeah. I mean, just a very quotable movie, quotable throughout. I think there's just a lot of humorous moments throughout the film, and yeah. So those are my thoughts on Star Trek 4: The Voyage Home. Thank you for watching.